And welcome in to another episode of the In All Kinds of Weather Forecast. Tonight, we go over an updated model ahead of the showdown between the Florida Gators and the Georgia Bulldogs. Dustin gets into a little bit of his midseason recap and his thoughts on where the Gators are. We look at the model and what it actually is, the difference between a model and a ranking. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a difference between a model and a ranking, and we go over that tonight. We talk about the model's success thus far against the money line and against the spread to help you place some accurate bets ahead of this coming weekend and in future weeks to come. And then, of course, our top 25 power ranking reveal, SEC power ranking reveal, and revised season prediction. As many Gator fans, that has been a topic of conversation. What win total can the Gators get to this year? But before we do all of that, please make sure to like and subscribe the show below. Helps us reach the Gator Nation and get better content out there to all of you, just like releasing a weekly In All Kinds of Weather forecaster model update. Dustin, this is where I'm going to bring you in. Exciting week here for Gator football. We play the Georgia Bulldogs in Jacksonville. Certainly, I think this year we're a little bit more excited heading into this matchup by virtue of the fact we had the victory against South Carolina 2 weeks ago. We've had a nice bye to enjoy that. We are now one game away from bowl eligibility. What are your thoughts thus far? Mid-season ranking or mid-season, Graham Mertz, Billy Napier, this Florida Gators football team sitting at 5-2.
Yeah, Chris, it's good to finally be talking with you. I know it's been a while since we've had the chance to come on the pod and have a conversation about Gator football, but we sit here, as you said, at 5-2. The Gators look pretty darn good, especially for where we expected them to be. I know I was certainly exuberant with their performance, especially on offense against South Carolina. Now, Florida's offense is not as good as we saw them against South Carolina. I think it's important to have perspective. South Carolina's defense is terrible. Their defensive coordinator is very likely going to be fired if he's not already fired by the recording of this podcast. All joking aside, Florida's offense showed me something beyond what their talent would show or their overall prowess would show. What Florida's offense showed me is they showed some creativity. I've been waiting all season for that type of downfield passing attack. I've been waiting all season for that opportunity to attack the defense in a high expected value manner. What I mean by that, when the defense is loading the box and they're giving you the passing lane, you throw the ball. Before, it seemed like Billy Napier would try to rest on his MO of running the ball and run the ball against a loaded box. South Carolina was determined to stop the run, and Florida, understandably, as they should have been doing all season, they decided to attack through the air. And in doing so, Florida not only had a ton more air yards, not only did Mertz throw for a ton more yards, but we scored points. And it took Florida scoring 41 points to win that game, and Florida did so, and they won the game. And how do we win the game? We won the game on a game-winning touchdown pass. When was the last time we saw Florida win the game on a game-winning touchdown pass? I mean, it must have been Kyle Trask the last time we had a game-winning touchdown pass. If I remember correctly.
2019 against Kentucky, I think, is the one that comes to mind. And we mentioned that
Yes.
in our podcast when we were recapping that game between Neil and I. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting to see this offense progress, come along, give us a game in which we were looking for. But certainly we're going to want to see that repeated and put on tape over and over again. And we're going to need that Herculean effort against the Georgia Bulldogs if we're going to have a chance to win this weekend. So, Dustin, let's get into the model. And
well, real quick, before getting into that, I just want to say this. I think you're right. Now, here's the question, and we'll get into a little bit of a Georgia preview at the end of this, but that's a big question. Can our offense continue to play with that type of game plan? Can we take advantage of Georgia's weaknesses, which they have weaknesses? They're a great team. No question about that. Do they have weaknesses? Yes. Are they beatable? Yes. Can we attack those? And that'll determine how successful we are against Georgia. So getting to the model, what do you want to talk
Well,
about?
Dustin, I mean, this week you released your model ahead of the bye week, and bye weeks tend to be kind of down weekends for Gator fans. They have a little more time to watch some of the games if they're not traveling to Gainesville or to the away site, similar to how Columbia was last 2 weeks ago. But your model seemed to pique a little bit of interest on the timeline, and it's time to remind our fans there is a difference between a power ranking and a poll. So the AP Top 25 is not the same thing as a power ranking. The poll certainly reflects the eye test, what we've seen on the field, actual results. A power ranking is a conglomerate of data put together that spits out a result that you put out every single week. And that is why there has been some controversy of having a 4-3 Texas A&M ranked in the top 15 ahead of the Florida Gators in your model. There are teams that Florida has beaten ahead of Florida in your model. And the model, of course, as we've seen, is not always correct. The Gators defied those odds a couple of weeks ago. Dustin, quickly give our fan base an idea of what this model computes. You don't have to give all the secret sauce away. We wouldn't want to do that. But what really is this power ranking showing fans on a week-to-week basis?
Well, Chris, you and I know very well how complex the model is behind the scenes. And there's a lot of numbers, a lot of data, a lot of computation that goes into coming up with a given power rank. But here's the big difference between a model and the AP Top 25, for example. The AP Top 25, the only data point that should contribute to that is the performance of that team on the field. You're not looking at what that team could do. You're looking at what that team did do. Very important. The model, on the other hand, is looking at the power and the capability and the potential of that team. All it's looking for is on a neutral field, the given power rank is a numeric value, and it's just saying on a neutral field, how many points would this team be favored by against the average team in college football? And so, and it's a pure average. So at times, Florida or any team is going to play above their potential, and at times that Florida is going to play below their potential. For example, against Kentucky, the model would indicate that Florida played severely below their potential given the outcome of the other games. On the other hand, in Tennessee, that game was at home. So just by that alone, Florida's going to have about a 6 to 7 point addition to their power ranking by just being at home, right? But according to the model, Florida actually played above their potential against Tennessee. Now, these are just two examples, but the model, all it's doing, just to recap, all it's doing is it's creating a power index, right? We hear that all the time with FPI, SP plus. It's a power index, and it's looking at how many points would that team be favored by on a neutral field by this model. And so that's where it's at. I have no sometimes it's funny because people are like, man, that team doesn't deserve it. Why is Miami ranked there? Miami has some good players. They had a good recruiting class last year. Now that recruiting class isn't a major factor. It's only about 15 or 20% of the talent index, but it's still a factor. Same with Texas A&M. That Texas A&M is playing well below their potential, but they have some dogs in that team that can play football if you give them the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at history, there's been times where Florida has played below their potential and when they were recruiting at an elite level under Will Muschamp. And certainly back then the model might have favored Florida a little bit more, but given the fact they had multiple top 5 recruiting classes in that regime, but they clearly were underplaying what that possibility was, only winning 6-7 games at a time. And thus why Will Muschamp's tenure was limited to 4 seasons at Florida. Just that's one example. And those examples are all over the place in college football. And that's why Texas A&M fans are talking about the amount it would be to buy out Jimbo Fisher from his contract because he's not exceeding or at least meeting the expectation of what that roster is. So definitely, I think that was a good description of what the model is. And I encourage fans to continue to follow along. Dustin will be releasing it at the time of this podcast dropping, that wonderful graphic that he puts out every week between the SEC and the top 25. And you know what, guy, and we'll get into it here in a second. And actually, let's go ahead and do it now. The model has been very successful against the money line and the spreads. You want to give the fans some hard data now that we're 8 weeks into the season. Dustin, what is the model's percentage success rate against the money line as well as against the spread?
Well, Chris, let me highlight a couple things real quick. So, number one, the model is designed at its base, it's designed to give a percentage likelihood that outcome is to happen. For example, I'm going to go ahead and spill the beans a little bit. Florida is favored, would be expected to beat Georgia based on these two given teams about 27% of the time. Georgia would be expected to win about 73% of the time. We'll get into the reason for that as well as the score that the model is expecting for the game. We'll get more into that later. That's the expected outcome for the game. Okay. Now, that percentage lies why certain things happen. Upsets happen, right? Upsets happen about 15% of the time on average in college football, and you're going to see that. Now, in terms of last week, we put out 10 games that were considered to be the games of the week, and the model against the money line got all of them right. Picked the winners. It picked all the winners correct, 100%. Against the spread, and there's some crazy games, right? That Washington score was outlandish. No one expected Washington to only score 13 points. Even still, the model was 70%, 7 out of 10 against the spread. That is outlandish. Now, the area that the model fell short on, and this is more of an internal thing, we don't really publish this, but we do project a score for every game in college football any given week. The model is still trying to get the training wheels off in terms of the picking the over under, so the amount of points that are scored between the two teams. So it's working on that. I expect it to be better this week, and we'll continue to release more information as we as a team feel confident that information is viable for the fans to use for maybe betting or for whatever. Of course, we don't necessarily endorse betting on the show, but if that's what you want to do, this model would be highly beneficial for that.
Well, we certainly don't have a sponsor yet that would be of a betting outlet, but if that time ever comes, we certainly would welcome that opportunity to work with one of those
Absolutely.
out there, given that we do put out this information to our fan base. And look, that is incredible. Top 10 games of the week, including the game of the week, 100% correct in picking the team that won the game. 70% against the spread is also a fantastic win rate. And that's been that's been the common theme, Dustin, of the entire year for your model, is that it has successfully been correct in picking most of the money lines and a lot of the spreads. So very good on the model for being able to predicting that, and for you to follow along with that. Dustin does put that out on his personal Twitter account at IAKOW Dustin. We also share it in all kinds of weather on our Twitter page, and we're going to continue to put that out as Dustin posts it each and every week. So you'll be able to make those friendly wagers if you do partake in that, or just for your data knowledge base to kind of understand what to expect maybe in the outcome of a game as you're watching it. If you love data like we do, this is a great way to get into it. And as Dustin continues to refine the model and get the right inputs there, the outputs hopefully will continue to improve. So Dustin, fantastic work. We can't, this has been something we talked about last year in the offseason of ways to improve our brand here at the All Kinds of Weather Forecast. And we want to continue to encourage the fans to go to our page, follow along like we mentioned, and then of course, like and subscribe our show here to really get the more in-depth knowledge of what the model is putting out. So with all that being said, it's time to release the top 25 reveal. Dustin, give us the top 25 teams in the All Kinds of Weather Forecaster for this week.
Well, hey, I'm going to stall for just 30 seconds. So the model was designed originally to help predict Florida football games. But you can't just look at one team and their advanced stats. You got to look at all college football in order to evaluate how Florida would do against any given team. So the irony is not this past week, but the week before that, of course, Florida played South Carolina. The model picked every game correct in the selected 8. I believe we did that particular time around, except for the Florida game. It picked Florida to lose by 4 points.
That's one we
Florida
were
won by
happy
2.
about. We were happy about that one for sure.
That's why I had to eat crow and eat chicken at the same time.
It was very
So,
welcome. It was very welcome.
well, let's get to it. This is a moment that we're all very excited for. So
Yeah,
let's get to that top 25. You and I are actually looking at this for the first time together. Number one, of course. Well, actually, we're going to start at 25. Number 25 in the nation for the In All Kinds of Weather forecast power ranking. The In All Kinds of Weather forecaster is what we call it. Number 25, we have Utah. Okay, this is a super controversial ranking for them, because this is what happened. Number 24, Florida. Number 23, Missouri. Number 22, North Carolina. Number 21, Duke. So before continuing, you're probably wondering why the heck is Florida power ranked ahead of Utah, even with the head-to-head? Well, Utah is still missing their quarterback. They still don't have their quarterback. And yes, they had a big win, but on a neutral field, Florida would be favored just slightly. It'd actually be a push, honestly, given the model. But Florida would be favored very slightly on a neutral field. Continuing, going to 20, this is one that has also been controversial. Miami is the 20th power ranked team. Why? Because the advanced stats say so. Okay? The talent says so. So if you're going to argue, it's how the model works. 19, Tennessee. 18, USC. Fell again 4 spots from last week. At 17, we have Clemson. Oregon State at 16. Texas A&M at 15. They continue to stay at that spot. Kansas State is a team the model absolutely adores. They're at 14. Ole Miss at 13. Alabama at 12. Notre Dame at 11. Florida State at 9. Washington fell 5 spots after that subpar performance the previous week. They're at 8. Georgia is at 7. So Georgia's fallen a little bit. Penn State at 6. LSU at 5. Oklahoma at 4. Oregon at 3. Ohio State at 2. And once again, capping the top of this week's power ranking, and the guy that Coach Mario Drayton so calmly called me out on. He thought this should have been the number 1 team, and they are indeed the number 1 team. Michigan is number 1. So that is this week's top 25. Chris, any questions about that before we move on?
Well, I don't want to signal too much on Michigan. Oh, I'm sorry. Had to drop that in there. Couldn't resist. Signaling on Michigan, though, that they are the number 1 team. And a lot of people have been thinking about that for a long time, is that they've just been very dominant on the field against every opponent. Now, their strength of schedule has not been strong. Dustin, does the forecaster take into consideration strength of schedule in the model?
Absolutely. Okay. Every significant metric within the model is adjusted for based on the strength of schedule. So, yeah, if Michigan played South Carolina's schedule, for example, Michigan would still be expected to win every game on that schedule. Would they be as dominant? Absolutely not. Why did I mention South Carolina? Because currently I have South Carolina as having the strongest schedule in the country overall. So,
and where does Florida rank in that? I would imagine they are pretty up there, pretty high too, considering of who we still have left to play in the back half of the schedule. Georgia, LSU, Missouri, Florida State, all ranked teams, 2 of which are ranked in the top 10 of your forecaster ranking. So that's certainly a pretty big ask there for the Gators to do that. But I think that's worth highlighting at least. And in the comment, while Dustin's finding that information really quick, the strength, the argument with Florida and Utah, a lot of Gator fans now look at that loss to Utah as frustrating because we saw what we are truly capable of on any field in the victories that we had against Tennessee, the victory that we had against South Carolina, and the offense starting to progress a little bit. Had that been there at the beginning of the season, Florida may have actually won that game against Utah, as the model predicted, as we all predicted on this show. So I don't necessarily have an issue with seeing Florida power ranked ahead of Utah. The one thing that I will note, though, is that Utah is an incredibly well-coached team, very sound, and that showed up again when they played USC this past Saturday, getting that victory. But of course, USC, who has precipitously dropped in many power rankings and polls across the country, their defense metrics are abysmal, one of the worst in the country in that. So, Dustin, I don't know if you did find that strength of schedule information. If not, that's fine. We can move on to the SEC power ranking.
Yeah, so Florida would be around the 37 range.
I'm sorry, for strength of schedule?
For their strength of schedule, 37th in the country.
Is that because of who they've played thus far versus is that what it's based off? It's not based off future. Okay, that would make sense then, because we've only played Tennessee, Utah, are the only two ranked opponents, I guess, right? In that for that. So then that makes a little more sense. I'm sure that number will go up in the next couple of weeks as we play those teams that I mentioned before.
Yes.
All right. SEC.
Anytime you play Georgia, your strength of schedule is going to go up significantly.
Oh yeah, and it will this week for sure. All right. Yep. SEC power ranking reveal. Dustin, where do the Gators rank amongst the 14 teams currently in the SEC?
So this is by far the most controversial SEC power ranking that we've ever done. And so we're going to get right to it. I'm going to snap my fingers and the graphic is going to show up on the screen, but I'm still going to dramatically read all of them from 1 to 14. Ready? 3, 2. Don't you love the power of editing? That's super funny. Anyway, so LSU, number 1. Their offense is spectacular, right? I mean, their quarterback is certainly going to be in New York for the Heisman. Potentially, I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he's certainly going to have a shot. LSU is looking significantly better than they did earlier in the season when they had that blunder against Florida State. Georgia is number 2. So Georgia has finally been dethroned in the SEC power ranking. Number 3, Alabama. Number 4, Ole Miss. Number 5, Texas A&M. Number 6, Tennessee. 7, Missouri. 8 is Florida. 9 is Arkansas. 10 is Auburn. 11 is Mississippi State. 12, South Carolina. 13, Kentucky. And 14, Vanderbilt. Something very interesting. Isn't it crazy how these teams that Florida's played somehow fall in the rankings after Florida plays them?
Uncanny. I don't know if that's going to be the case after Florida plays Georgia or some of these opponents that are coming up, but it is interesting. And, in respect to LSU, it is controversial a little bit in the sense that I think that defense has been incredibly porous this year. They have not been able to stop a nosebleed other than against the teams that are vastly inferior to them, such as Army, who they beat 62-0 at home this week. They're going to get their test coming up not this Saturday, but the following Saturday when they go to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama, who seems to be improving as the season goes on here and still has that stout defense. So they are going to be put to the test in a couple of weeks for that number 1 spot in the power ranking. And then, of course, you've got teams like Georgia who are, conceivably the odds-on favorite to win the East. They're one of the top favorite to win in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. It will be interesting to see, though. I'm curious how LSU responds over the next couple of weeks. They're going to have some difficult games. They will play Alabama. They'll play us at home. That's not a gimme game. That's certainly not. I don't think we're Army or one of those FCS opponents that they've played at home thus far, where they've been able to run the score up and get over 500 yards of offense. But when we talked to Mark Ryan the other night, he did mention that LSU would be an accomplishment to hold them under 550 yards of offense. So I do think LSU, if they beat Alabama, there is a shot they could be a 2-loss team in the college football playoff if they ran the table and then won in Atlanta. So it's not far-fetched. I think people just will raise their eyebrows at the data only because of their defensive efficiency ranking. Is it just because their offense is just so vastly ahead of other teams that's why they're getting this number one ranking, given the fact that the defense is just so the offense is just so dominant?
It's not just that, but they're efficient. When they have the ball, there is a significantly higher than average expected points at any given point when they have the ball. And that's really what it comes down to. The model is looking at when that team has the ball, what is the likelihood they're going to get in the end zone? What is the likelihood they're going to get a field goal? And then it uses that to come up with a given score. Now, the way that the power ranking works is it has a score metric for offense and then a score metric for defense, and then it subtracts the defense from the offense. So basically, teams that give up more points than they would score, they're obviously lower in the power ranking. And basically, what if you really get down to that offensive metric is the amount of points that team would be expected to score against the average college football team. And the defense, that metric would be the expected amount of points that team would be expected to give up against the average college football team. Without getting into the details of the model, the delta on it for LSU, as you can see on the graphic, is about 23 points. So against the average college football team, LSU would be favored by 23 points according to the model.
Oh, that's pretty significant. Well, Dustin, this was good. It's good to give the fans this update. Given, I know you may not have all these predictions ready, you still need to run a few things in the model before it is released, but are there some games this week that you're going to be looking at in your game of the week that the model will be predicting?
So for that, I think I just have to say this. I know this isn't the answer that y'all want to hear right now, but Saturday, please stay tuned. Saturday morning, really first thing in the morning, I'm going to get you guys the top 10 games of the week, along with that final Florida score, which we're going to reveal in just a few minutes against Georgia. But the games of the week, we're also going to highlight the game of the week, and we will release all that information, still finalizing a few things when it comes to some of the other games and some of the other schedules. But we'll get to it. The thing I am prepared for, if you're prepared to talk about it, Chris, is the rest of the season.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's pretty set.
Let's run through that, and then let's give your Georgia score prediction, and then we'll get on out of here.
Absolutely. So here we are. So the Gators currently sit at 5-2. The model is not just spitting out a score, as we've said previously. The model is spitting out a percentage chance of any given outcome, right? So the model currently has Georgia favored to win the game, but it still gives Florida a 27% chance to win. So that 27% is added up with the total to give you the expected outcome of the season. And that's why Florida is expected to go 7-5 on the season. There's certain 50-50 games that the model is expecting Florida to lose that Florida can very well win. And I would actually go out on a limb and predict Florida to win that game. Let's go ahead and start. So the Florida-Georgia score, and you'll see it right on the screen. It has Georgia beating Florida 33-21. So that is a 12-point victory for the Dogs.
A slight cover against Vegas, because right now the Vegas line is minus 14.5 in favor of the Dogs. So a 12-point loss would be a cover for the Gators in this one.
Right, and actually the calculator, and this is very important information. The calculator is based on the opening line, because the opening line is based on a pure calculation that comes out by the Vegas computers, and then as money comes on a team, that's where the line will change in order to maximize the money for Vegas. Anyhow, looking at the Arkansas Florida game. This is where Florida will bounce back and win by a score according to the model of 31-21. Yes, this is a nooner, but Florida is still expected to go out with the victory with the black uniforms. Well, that should get the Gator Nation excited. But then you have Florida at LSU. LSU has an amazing offense, and this model expects LSU to win by a score of 41-24. The next game we have is Florida versus Missouri. So at Missouri on the road, the model expects Missouri to win by 10 points by a score of 31-21. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a barn burner on our hands with the final game of the season. Florida State at Florida in the Swamp, Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, likely a night game. The model expects Florida State to slightly edge out the Gators by a score of 28-26. 28-26, final score, Florida State beating Florida. But here's the crazy part. The model is projecting Florida to go 7-5, right? But if you go game by game, the model is having Florida go 6-6. So where's that discrepancy? That discrepancy is the Florida State game. And so I'm going to go out on a limb and say Florida gets an extra field goal and wins the game 29-28. See, it's a coin flip right there. We'll get more into the percentages as we pick the games down the line, but this is exciting. It's exciting to be in this spot. And man, if we did not beat South Carolina, that I believe that game completely changed the season. So, Chris, any other thoughts before we crash land this thing?
Well, no, I really like what you did there, ending it with that and that caveat of what game the Gators get to 7. That's sort of been the topic of conversation is which one is that? Is it Missouri or is it Florida State? Those two seem to be the common theme. Given that we have to beat Arkansas too at home to get to that 6th win to take the pressure off of having to win one of those down the stretch. And that's assuming that Georgia does beat us as they are predicted to do. But I do like that prediction that Florida does get to 7. Both Neil and I, when speaking with Mark Ryan this week, both said we'd get to 7 wins. And I would agree. I think we get to 7. And if you get to a bowl game, you get that 8th win there, 8-5, 2-game improvement from last year with this number 3 recruiting class that has been improved over the last week and hopes to be improved before signing day in December. That's big momentum going into year 3 for the Billy Napier tenure.
Right.
And I think that's something to be celebrated. So very good stuff, Dustin. We appreciate.
So real quick, sorry to interrupt you, but I think I got to talk about the Florida Georgia game just real quick.
Okay, we got like 2 minutes, so let's get that prediction. All right,
let's do it. Keys to the game. So I think it's all going to come down to Florida's offense. Now it certainly helps Florida, and it's a big reason why Florida is power ranked by 12 to lose the game rather than by 14 or 15, and that comes down to the fact that Georgia is missing their best player on offense, in my opinion. Bowers, huge player, not going to play. Obviously, I think he's out for the season, if I'm not mistaken, unfortunately for them. So because of that, Florida has to figure out ways to capitalize on that. What I mean by that, the defense has to rise to the occasion because Georgia's offense is designed to take advantage of the linebackers. I also happen to believe that our linebacking core is young. I do believe that our linebacking core is capable of defending Georgia in the way that they like to run offense. So I think this is going to be a big time game for our linebackers. It's going to be a big time for our safeties as well. I think Castile has to have an incredible game. James has to have an incredible game. And if we do that, we're going to have a shot. The big question is going to be offense. If Florida can have a similar game plan to what they had against South Carolina, where they really took advantage of the box count and the numbers game and threw the ball and capitalized on that, I think Florida's going to make it a game. But I think it's just going to come down to talent. Okay, it's going to come down to talent and explosive plays. And I'm concerned Florida's not going to be able to stop the run when it matters most. I think that it's going to be close, but at the end of the game, Georgia's just going to be able to hold on to the rock, milk the clock, and run with the ball, and keep the score where we see it right now around 33-21. So that's my pick for the game, Chris. I hope I'm wrong, and I know certainly you guys hope you're wrong too. Whenever that score is revealed, have you guys revealed your score yet?
Well, we'll be doing that later on this week, and certainly look out for that preview episode where we're going to have some special guests to come on and talk about the Florida Georgia rivalry. Stay tuned for that. And when that does drop, maybe simultaneously do so with this episode here that you heard tonight. Be sure to tune into both of these for this one to get your model update as I predict the Gators to cover the spread but lose to Georgia. And we will be giving our predictions on that other preview episode to give you guys some jam-packed content as we wrap up this week and get you ready for the showdown in Jacksonville this Saturday. So thank you once again for tuning in to the In All Kinds of Weather forecast. I was your host, Chris Yanes, alongside my co-host and model creator, Dustin Smith. Thank you once again. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show down below, and have a great night. Go Gators.
Go Gators.